The air down here tastes like a mouthful of pennies and a dying star. It is a thick, cloying atmosphere, heavy with the smell of ozone and the metallic rot of things that were never meant to breathe oxygen. I work in the belly of the beast, level 4C of Area 51, where the lights do not shine so much as they pulse with a dying, industrial tremor. This isn't a lab, it is a tomb. My name is Trevor Whitmore, and my first day began with a single sheet of paper and a warning that echoed in the hollows of my skull. Rule number 1, the replacement. Aaron Pike was my handler. He was a man of dull jokes and a photograph of a golden retriever tucked into his pocket. We were tasked with relocating a Class 4 containment unit, a monolithic slab of unreflective black glass that felt like a hole cut out of reality. It did not reflect the flickering white light of the corridor. It seemed to pull the illumination into itself, hungry and cold. It was a tooth pulled from the jaw of some cosmic god, and it was heavy with a weight that defied physics. We were navigating a narrow maintenance junction when it happened. Aaron's boots slipped on a slick of hydraulic fluid. He lurched, his hand catching the jagged edge of the container's frame. I heard the sound before I saw the result, a wet, rhythmic tear, like a knife through heavy velvet. Aaron did not scream. He did not even gasp. He just pulled his hand back and stared at the wound with a curiosity that made my skin crawl. The blood was not red. It did not spray or drip with the frantic heat of a human heart. It was a thick, viscous emerald, the color of a stagnant pond at midnight. It oozed out in heavy, pulsing ropes, carrying a faint, phosphorescent glow that illuminated the grime on the floor. It smelled like wet copper and scorched earth. I looked at Aaron, expecting to see shock, but his face was a mask of static. In a matter of seconds, the man I knew evaporated. His eyes, once a warm brown, turned into flat, milky orbs, devoid of depth, like glass marbles rolled in ash. The lines of age and worry on his forehead smoothed out, leaving his skin as pale and tight as a drum. He stood perfectly still, his head tilting to the side at an angle that should have snapped his cervical vertebrae. He began to vibrate, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in my teeth and made my vision blur. It was the sound of a dead radio station. Aaron. I whispered. The name felt like a lie. He did not look at me. He looked through me, as if I were a ghost and he was the only thing that was real. The green sludge on his hand was already knitting the flesh back together, weaving fibrous, twitching threads across the gap. He was not healing. He was being overwritten. I did not wait for him to speak. I slammed my palm into the emergency lockdown plate. The klaxons tore through the air, a jagged, screeching wail that felt like a razor against my eardrums. The flickering white lights turned a violent, bruised red. Aaron did not flinch. He just stood in the center of the alarm, a silent monument to something alien and ancient. The containment team arrived with the mechanical precision of a surgical strike. 5 men in faceless, matte black tactical gear. They did not call out a warning. They did not ask for his status. They saw the green stain on the floor and the hollow vessel standing before them. The lead operative raised his rifle. 2 suppressed thuds echoed in the narrow hall. Aaron's body jerked, hitting the floor with a heavy, wet sound. There was no mercy in their movements, only the cold efficiency of a cleanup crew. One operative knelt and pressed a device to Aaron's neck, while another began spraying a steaming acid over the green pool on the floor. I looked down at my digital manifest. As the acid hissed, Aaron's name began to flicker. It turned into a string of nonsensical characters before vanishing entirely. His employee ID, his clearance level, his history, it was all being scrubbed from the system in real time. By the time they hauled his body away, the record showed I had been working this shift alone. There was no Aaron Pike. There was only the static in my head and the cold, unreflective black box waiting to be moved. The silence that followed Aaron's erasure was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of lead that pressed against my lungs. In the depths of the facility, there is no such thing as a mourning period. Grief is a security risk. You swallow it, or you join the ghosts. I was reassigned to Hangar 3 within the hour. They didn't even give me time to wash the phantom scent of Aaron's copper-green blood from my nostrils. Hangar 3 was a cavernous void, a cathedral of corrugated steel and shadow where the air felt thin, as if the very oxygen were being rationed by something greedy. In the center of that hollowed-out mountain sat the reason for my second rule. It didn't have a name, only a designation that sounded like a serial number for a nightmare. It was a craft, I suppose, though craft implies something built with intent and hands. This was a smooth, obsidian tear in the fabric of the room. It was 30 feet of seamless, unreflective curvature that seemed to drink the overhead fluorescent light without giving a single photon back. It was a hole in the world. Rule 2 was scorched into my mind like a brand. If the vessel breathes, do not inhale. If it opens, do not look. If a soul enters, they are already scrubbed. I stood 20 feet back, my boots clicking rhythmically on the cold concrete, a sound that felt brittle and small in the face of that silent, black monolith. Beside me was Lewis. He was a veteran of the sublevels, a man whose face was a roadmap of twitching nerves and skin the color of wet parchment. He hadn't spoken since we arrived. He just stared at the craft with eyes that looked like they had seen the back of his own skull. He looked hollow, a shell of a man being slowly entered by the static that hummed in the air of Hangar 3. Then, the hum shifted. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. It was a vibration that rattled the fillings in my teeth and made my marrow feel like it was boiling. The obsidian skin of the craft didn't move, yet a seam appeared, a hairline fracture of impossible geometry that bled a light so blue it felt like an insult to the human eye. It was bioluminescent, but not like the soft glow of a deep-sea fish. This was an aggressive, predatory blue. It was the color of a dying sun filtered through a layer of ice and digital rot. It pulsed with the rhythm of a heavy, slowing heart, casting long, jagged shadows against the hangar walls that seemed to move independently of the light. The air suddenly tasted like ozone and ancient, stagnant water. Lewis took a step forward. I reached out, my fingers trembling, wanting to catch his sleeve, but my hand froze. Rule 2. You do not reach out. Lewis's face was washed in that sickly, electric neon. He didn't look afraid. He looked seduced. He looked like a man who had finally heard his name called from the bottom of a well. The hatch, if you could call it that, didn't slide or pivot. The metal simply ceased to exist in that space, leaving an opening that looked into a blue-lit abyss. Lewis stepped across the threshold. The moment his boot touched the interior, the hull of the craft underwent a terrifying transformation. The unreflective black dissolved, turning into a semi-transparent membrane, like the clouded cornea of a giant, rotting eye. I could see through the ship. I could see Lewis standing in the center of a space that should not have been able to fit inside the exterior dimensions. The interior was a cathedral of glass and refracted light, stretching away into an impossible distance, a void of shimmering geometry that made my head spin with vertigo. Lewis wasn't alone. In that blue, pulsing static, he began to gesture. He was nodding, his lips moving in a silent conversation with the air. I saw something move behind him, or rather, I saw the absence of light move. It was a ripple in the blue, a distortion that looked like a man-shaped hole in the universe. Lewis reached out a hand, his fingers disappearing into the distortion. He looked back at me through the translucent hull. His eyes were no longer human. They were reflecting that terrible, bioluminescent blue, glowing with a fervor that made my stomach churn. He gave a small, terrifyingly calm smile, and then he simply walked deeper. He didn't get smaller as he moved away. He didn't fade. He just unraveled. With every step, a piece of him seemed to stay behind, hovering in the blue air like a smudge on a lens, until he was nothing more than a collection of static and memories. The ship let out a final, bone-shaking thrum, and the hull snapped back to obsidian black. The blue light died instantly, leaving me in a darkness so thick it felt like I was buried alive. The silence that returned was absolute. No footsteps, no breathing, no Lewis. I looked at the security camera in the corner of the hangar. Its red eye blinked once, a cold, mechanical judgment. I knew what was happening in the server rooms 3 levels up. Files were being deleted. Payroll records were being altered. A locker was being entered by men in hazmat suits who wouldn't speak a word. By the time I walked out of Hangar 3, Lewis wouldn't just be dead, he would be a fiction. I stood there, staring at the black craft, feeling the void in the room where a human being had stood only moments before. My hands were shaking so hard I had to shove them into my pockets. I realized then that Rule 2 wasn't about safety. It was about witnessing the theft of a soul and learning how to look away. The blue light was still burned into my retinas, a ghost of a color that didn't belong in this world, and as I turned to leave, I could swear I heard Lewis's voice whispering through the static in my head, telling me that the ship was still hungry. The ship's hunger wasn't a sound. It was an ache in my marrow, a cold vibration that suggested the vacuum of space was currently staring through the back of my skull. I didn't look back. In Area 51, looking back is how you lose your mind. Looking forward is how you lose your soul. My boots felt heavy, clicking against the cold, industrial steel of the level 4 catwalks, the sound swallowed by the oppressive hum of the facility's life support. Every shadow in the corner of my eye seemed to stretch and peel away from the wall, mimicking the way Lewis had simply unraveled into that blue void. The air felt thick, charged with a static that tasted like pennies and ozone. Then the light shifted. The steady, sterile white flickered and died, replaced by the violent, rhythmic pulse of the emergency strobes. Blood-red light washed over the corrugated walls, turning the corridor into the throat of some great, mechanical beast. The sirens didn't scream. They moaned, a low-frequency thrum that vibrated in my teeth. This was Rule 3 territory. I felt the heat before I saw the cause. It wasn't the warmth of a radiator or the dry heat of the desert above us. It was a greasy, wet heat that smelled of scorched rubber and something sickly sweet, like rotting peaches left in a furnace. Rule 3 was simple on paper. If it flows, do not obstruct. If it gathers, run. I saw it at the end of corridor C12. It looked like an oil slick at first, a puddle of glossy, unreflective blackness that had no business being on a pristine military floor. But oil doesn't move against the incline. This substance slithered. It was a sentient ink, a liquid shadow that seemed to swallow the red strobe light rather than reflect it. It moved with a terrifying, rhythmic undulation, a predator made of fluid, seeking something. I froze, my back pressed against the cold metal of a bulkhead. My breath hitched in my throat, coming out as a jagged rasp. I watched it move toward a maintenance alcove where the pipes congregated like a cluster of iron veins. "Hey, Trevor, you see the pressure drop on line 4. The voice cracked through the static of the alarm. It was Miles. Good, honest, oblivious Miles. He stepped out from a side junction, his heavy utility belt clinking, a wrench gripped in his calloused hand. He didn't see the shadow. He was looking at the gauges on the wall, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Miles, get back." I tried to shout, but my voice felt like it was made of dry sand. Rule 3. Look at the floor. Miles turned, blinking against the frantic red strobes. "What?" "The sensors are redlining. I got a vent." He stopped. He saw it. The black liquid had accelerated. It wasn't slithering anymore. It was flowing with a desperate, hungry speed. It wasn't interested in Miles, not yet. It wanted the pipes. It wanted the confinement. The liquid surged toward a floor drain, disappearing into the grate like a nest of snakes retreating into a hole. The silence that followed was worse than the sirens. The red light pulsed once, twice, 3 times. Then, the walls began to groan. In Area 51, they tell you that geometry is a suggestion and physics is a polite request. The sentient liquid didn't just fill the pipes, it colonized them. I could hear it through the steel, a frantic, wet boiling sound. It was compressing itself, forcing its entire mass into the narrowest channels of the wall. And where there is compression, there is heat. Intense, impossible heat. "Trevor, what the hell is that smell?" Miles took a step toward the wall, reaching out a hand as if to touch the vibrating metal. "Miles, no. Away from the bulkhead." The wall didn't just break, it detonated. A section of the heavy steel piping, reinforced to withstand thousands of pounds of pressure, simply gave up. It didn't shatter like glass, it peeled back like scorched fruit. From the rupture, the black liquid didn't flow, it sprayed. It was a high-pressure jet of liquid fire that defied the laws of thermodynamics. It didn't glow orange or red. It remained that same, abyssal black, but the air around it shimmered and warped with a heat so intense I felt the hair on my arms curl and vanish. Miles didn't have time to scream. Not at first. The black spray hit him squarely in the chest. It didn't splash off him. It adhered. It functioned like a living napalm, a targeted, malevolent heat that sought out the organic and refused to let go. I watched in a paralysis of horror as Miles was lifted off his feet by the sheer force of the gout. The liquid didn't just burn his clothes, it fused them to his body. I could see the nylon of his jumpsuit liquefying, turning into a bubbling, blackened crust that merged with the surface of his skin. Then came the sound. A wet, bubbling shriek that tore through the strobing red darkness. It was a sound of absolute, unadulterated agony, a soul being cooked inside its own casing. Miles hit the floor, thrashing, his hands clawing at his chest, but his fingers only came away with strips of his own melting flesh. The liquid was moving on him, over him, seeking the heat of his blood, his internal organs. It was a black fire that wanted to live inside him. The corridor was a vision of hell. The red strobes caught the mist of blood and black ink hanging in the air. The smell was unbearable, the metallic tang of a slaughterhouse mixed with the acrid stench of a tire fire. I saw the liquid beginning to pull around him, forming a predatory circle, drawing back for another surge, sensing the confinement of his very ribcage. The terror broke my paralysis. I knew the rules, but I also knew the gear. I lunged for the heavy-duty containment canister mounted on the wall, a specialized fire extinguisher filled with a nitrogen-based cooling foam designed to kill the kinetic energy of anomalous fluids. I ripped it from the bracket, the cold metal biting into my palms. "Hold on, Miles. Don't move." I squeezed the trigger. A blast of sub-zero white foam erupted, hissing like a dying god. I aimed for the source of the spray, the ruptured pipe where the black heart of the shadow was still pulsing out. The foam hit the black liquid and the reaction was violent. A cloud of thick, grey steam exploded into the hallway, blinding me, filling my lungs with a taste like wet ash. I kept the trigger pinned, sweeping the nozzle toward Miles. I saw the black liquid recoil. It hated the cold. It hissed, a sound like 1,000 angry wasps, and began to retreat back into the jagged mouth of the pipe, seeking the safety of the dark, pressurized depths. I didn't stop until the canister was empty, until the corridor was buried in a foot of freezing, chemical snow. The sirens finally cut out, leaving a ringing silence that felt like a physical weight. The red strobes continued their rhythmic dance, painting the white foam in shades of ethereal spray. I dropped the canister and scrambled toward Miles. He was still breathing, but it was a wet, rattling sound, the sound of a man drowning on dry land. I reached for him, then stopped, my hands hovering in the air. There was nothing to grab. His chest was a ruin of fused fabric and charred, blackened meat. His face, the spray had caught the side of his jaw. The skin had been sloughed away, revealing the white of the bone beneath, now stained a permanent, bruised purple by the liquid's touch. His eyes were wide, rolling in his head, reflecting the strobe lights like a dying animal's. "Trevor." He wheezed. A bubble of bloody foam popped on his lips. It's still inside. I can feel it. It's so hot." I looked at his hands. The black liquid hadn't all retreated. Small, needle-like droplets were burrowing under his fingernails, turning the beds of his nails into pits of dark, simmering ink. He was disfigured, ruined, a human map of a nightmare. I grabbed his shoulders, ignoring the way the scorched fabric felt like wet parchment under my gloves, and began to drag him back toward the decontamination arch. Every movement elicited a fresh, jagged groan from his throat. I felt a sick, cold realization wash over me. I had saved his life, but in Area 51, that wasn't a mercy. I looked back at the pipe. The white foam was already melting, dripping away to reveal the jagged hole. Deep inside the darkness of the plumbing, I could hear a faint, rhythmic thumping. The liquid was still there. It was waiting. It was learning. It had tasted Miles, and it liked the way we burned. I leaned my head against the cold wall as I pulled Miles through the heavy blast doors, the red light still flickering against my closed eyelids. I thought of Rule 1. I thought of Aaron and his green blood. I thought of Lewis and the blue light. And now Miles, whose skin was fused to his very soul by a shadow that wanted to be fire. The facility wasn't just containing these things. It was feeding them. It was feeding them us. And as the med team finally rounded the corner, faceless men in white hazmat suits who moved with the clinical indifference of reapers, I realized that Miles wouldn't be going to a hospital. He'd be going to a different kind of cage. In this place, you don't recover. You just become another part of the list. The air in the containment wing had a flavor like copper and old batteries, a metallic tang that stayed on the back of your tongue long after you had clocked out. Following the removal of Miles, the silence that rushed back into the corridor was heavier than the concrete walls. It was a thick, oily quiet, the kind that feels like it is coating your lungs in stagnant water. I stood there, my hands still trembling from the weight of the fire extinguisher, staring at the spot where the sentient liquid had tried to consume a man from the inside out. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ribs, hammering against the static-heavy atmosphere of Level 4. Beside me, Johnny was breathing hard, his eyes darting toward the ceiling vents. He looked older in this light, pale, washed out by the flickering overhead fluorescence that hummed with a low-frequency dread. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. We were both thinking about the list. Rule 4 was the one we never talked about during the coffee breaks in the break room. It was the rule that sat in the back of your mind like a rotting tooth. Above us, the air vents rattled. It wasn't the rhythmic, mechanical vibration of a cooling fan. It was a wet, skittering sound, the noise of something with too many joints moving through the dark. It sounded like dry bones scraping against rusted iron. I looked up, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom, catching the glint of something obsidian and jagged moving behind the steel slats. The sound stopped. The facility seemed to hold its breath. Then, the grate exploded. It didn't fall, it was launched. The metal panel whistled past my ear, embedding itself in the far wall with a violent thud. Before I could even scream, a shape blurred out of the vent. It was a nightmare of biological geometry, a creature that moved with the jagged, unnatural speed of a glitching video. It didn't have a face, only a central void lined with rows of vibrating, translucent needles that hummed like a hornet's nest. It was a predator designed in a laboratory of a different dimension, a thing of void and hunger. It launched itself directly at my throat, its many limbs unfurling like the petals of a dying black flower. I felt the wind of its passing, the cold draft of the void hitting my skin, but I never felt the impact. A hand, strong and calloused, slammed into my chest. Johnny. He didn't just push me, he threw me with a desperate, frantic strength that sent me sprawling across the slick, sterile floor. I hit the ground hard, the air leaving my lungs in a ragged gasp. I scrambled to my feet, my vision swimming, just in time to see the creature tumble past him. It had missed its primary strike, but as it surged back toward the shadows of the machinery, one of its needle-like appendages swept across Johnny's forearm. It was a shallow, pathetic-looking scratch, a thin line no longer than a finger, barely breaking the skin. Johnny stood there, his arm hanging at his side. He didn't cry out. He didn't even flinch. He just stared at the wound. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of the creature retreating into the dark recesses of the hangar, its skittering legs echoing like a rain of dead leaves. Then, the change began. The wound didn't bleed red. A drop of emerald bile oozed out, thick and glowing with a sick, bioluminescent intensity. It looked like toxic neon against his tan skin. I watched, paralyzed, as the green stain began to spread through his veins, turning the blue rivers of his circulatory system into something alien and putrid. Johnny looked at his arm, then he looked at me. His eyes weren't full of the usual light. They were already clouding over with a milky, gelatinous film, the pupils dilating until they swallowed the iris whole. We both knew Rule 4. A single scratch. A single drop of the rot. There is no quarantine in Area 51. There is only termination. I tried to step toward him, my hand outstretched, my voice a broken rasp. Johnny, I can get the medkit. Maybe if we coderize it. No, Trevor, he said, and his voice already sounded different. It was hollow, echoing as if he was speaking from the bottom of a deep, rusted well. The static is in my head. I can feel it. I can feel it rewriting the code. He scrambled back, his boots squeaking against the polished floor, heading for the heavy, lead-lined containment door of Chamber 4C. It was a reinforced kill, a room designed for the absolute destruction of hazardous materials. Johnny, wait! I screamed, my voice cracking like dry wood. He didn't look back. He slammed his palm against the manual override, the hydraulic hiss of the door sounding like a final, rattling breath. He stepped inside the chamber and turned around, his face illuminated by the harsh, clinical light of the containment cell. Through the thick, leaded glass, I could see the green rot climbing up his neck, mapping out his jawline in glowing, emerald fractals. He wasn't Johnny anymore. He was becoming a vessel for something else, something cold and unreflective. He pressed his hand against the glass. He looked at me with those darkening eyes, and for a split second, the fog cleared. For a heartbeat, I didn't see a coworker. I saw the person I had grown up with, the boy who used to hide from thunderstorms under my bedsheets, the only person left in this world who truly knew me. His lips moved, silent behind the soundproof glass. He was telling me to run. He was telling me it was okay. The overhead lights in the corridor turned a jagged, warning red. The facility's automated defense system had detected the biological anomaly. A deep, mechanical groan vibrated through the floorboards, the sound of the heat protocol engaging. I threw myself against the glass, pounding my fists until the skin broke and smeared red streaks across the surface. Johnny, open the door. Johnny, please. He just shook his head, his expression shifting into a mask of stoic, terrifying peace. He reached for the interior emergency incinerator switch. He didn't want the security teams to find him. He didn't want to be a specimen in a jar. He chose the void over the cage. The ignition was silent at first. Then, a blinding, roaring orange glow erupted behind the glass. It wasn't just fire. It was a concentrated blast of ionized plasma, a miniature sun birthed in a concrete box. The light was so intense it felt like it was peeling the retinas from my eyes. I didn't look away. I couldn't. I watched his silhouette standing perfectly still in the center of the inferno. The heat was so great that the air inside the chamber turned into a shimmering, distorted haze. I saw the flesh peel away from his bones like wet paper in a gale. He didn't scream. Or maybe the glass was just too thick to let the sound of a soul dying through. His form began to blacken, crumbling into ash that was immediately incinerated into nothingness. The orange light filled my entire world, a furnace of grief and desperation that burned hotter than the plasma. I fell to my knees, the heat radiating through the reinforced glass searing the skin of my face, but the coldness inside me was deeper. The Reapers in their faceless white suits would be here soon to sweep up the dust and erase his name from the duty roster. They would tell me to forget. They would tell me it was a malfunction, a statistical necessity for the safety of the world. But as the orange glow faded, leaving nothing but a charred, empty room and the smell of ozone, I knew they were wrong. Johnny wasn't a statistic. He wasn't a rule. He was my brother, and they had just turned him into smoke. I sat there in the dark, the flickering red emergency lights casting long, jagged shadows against the wall, and I felt the last of my fear die. It was replaced by something much colder, something that felt like the black liquid I had fought earlier, a heavy, burning resolve. They thought the rules were there to keep us safe. They were wrong. The rules were there to keep us silent. And as I looked at the empty chamber, I realized I was done being quiet. The interrogation room didn't have walls so much as it had boundaries of absolute shadow. The single lamp above the steel table hummed with a low, electric frequency that felt like a needle scratching against the inside of my skull. It was the sound of the void, a rhythmic, buzzing static that drowned out the memory of Johnny's screams. I sat there, my hands trembling with a kinetic energy I couldn't suppress, watching a man in a charcoal suit flip through a folder that contained the sum total of a human life reduced to ink and paper. The air in the room tasted of ozone and old copper, the lingering scent of the incineration protocols still clinging to my skin like a layer of grease. The man across from me didn't have a name. Here, names were just vulnerabilities, handles that the facility used to drag you into the dark. He looked up, his eyes two glass marbles reflecting the harsh overhead bulb. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like an accountant. That was the real horror of Area 51. The cosmic nightmares were locked in the basements, but the men who kept the keys were terrifyingly ordinary. He leaned forward, and I could hear the phantom sound of Johnny's blood hitting the floor, that thick, alien green sludge that had signaled the end of everything. My brother, my little brother, who followed me into this hell because he believed in the mission. Now he was a smear of carbon on a containment floor, and the man in the suit was smiling. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a machine reset to factory settings. Rule 5, Trevor, he whispered, and the words felt like cold water pouring into my lungs. You know the rule. You've read the sheet. You signed the NDA with your own blood before you ever saw the sun go down over the Groom Lake ridge. I knew the rule. It was the most important one. It was the seal on the tomb. Rule 5, the laugh. You are an ambassador of the mundane. If anyone asks, you are a logistics clerk. If a neighbor sees a light in the sky, you tell them it's a weather balloon and you laugh until your ribs ache. You deny the monsters. You deny the ships. You deny the screams. You make the truth look like the punchline of a bad joke. The man slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of a crumpled sedan wrapped around a telephone pole on a lonely stretch of Nevada highway. The glass was shattered, and there was a generic body bag being loaded into an ambulance. It was a lie. A perfect, clinical, bureaucratic lie. This is how Johnny died, the man said. His voice was as flat as a heart monitor after the pulse stops. He was driving home late. He fell asleep at the wheel. A tragic accident for a young man with so much potential. You're going to call your mother tonight, Trevor. You're going to tell her how much you miss him. You're going to cry about the car, and then you're going to laugh about how he always was a terrible driver. You will laugh, Trevor, because if you don't, if you let even a sliver of the truth bleed out into the world, We won't just erase his memory. We will erase hers. The rage that surged through me wasn't hot. It didn't boil. It froze. It was a sub-zero spike of ice that punctured my heart and anchored me to the chair. I looked at the photo of the fake crash and then back at the man. I could feel the static in the room thickening, a physical weight pushing down on my shoulders. I thought of Johnny shoving me out of the way. I thought of the way he looked at me through the glass of the containment chamber, his eyes wide, his skin bubbling as the heat protocols turned the air into a furnace. He hadn't screamed for himself. He had mouthed the word run. He died to save me from a scratch, and now they wanted me to turn his sacrifice into a punchline. They wanted me to spit on his ashes to keep their secret safe. The room felt like it was rotting around me, the smell of decay rising from the floorboards. This place was a cancer, a hungry, invisible maw that swallowed people and spat out redacted files. I can do that, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates. It sounded like the black liquid slithering through the pipes. The man nodded, satisfied. He pushed a burner phone toward me. Good. Do it now. The script is on the screen. Follow it exactly. If you deviate by a single word, the cleaners will be at your mother's door before you hang up. I picked up the phone. The plastic felt cheap and oily. I looked at the screen. The words were there, a sequence of hollow sentences designed to bury a soul. My mother's face flashed in my mind, the way she used to bake bread on Sundays, the way she worried about Johnny because he was always too brave for his own good. She didn't know he was gone yet. She was probably sitting in her kitchen, waiting for the weekly call that kept us tethered to the real world. I dialed the number. Every beep of the keypad felt like a hammer blow. My heart was a drum of war, beating a rhythm of pure, unadulterated betrayal. Not a betrayal of the facility, but a betrayal of the silence they demanded. The line clicked. Trevor, is that you? Her voice came through, thin and fragile, a thread of light in the crushing dark of the interrogation room. I looked at the man in the suit. He was watching me, his finger hovering over a kill switch on his tablet. He wanted the lie. He wanted the laugh. He wanted me to become a ghost, just like everyone else who worked beneath the desert. Mom, I said. I felt the static behind my eyes begin to scream. There's something I have to tell you. The man in the suit narrowed his eyes. He tapped the tablet, a warning. Johnny's dead. Mom, I whispered. My voice was steady, stripped of the fake grief they wanted me to perform. But he didn't die in a car. He wasn't a Clark. He died in a cage, burned alive by men who treat humans like disposable filters for their nightmares. He died saving me from something that shouldn't exist. The man in the suit lurched forward, his face twisting into a mask of shock and fury. He reached for the phone, but I was faster. I stood up, the chair screeching against the floor like a dying animal. I felt the power of the facility, the sheer, arrogant weight of it, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was the void. I was the black liquid. I was the ship that vanished into nothingness. Listen to me. I shouted into the phone as the heavy steel door of the interrogation room burst open and security teams flooded in, their rifles leveled at my chest. I'm at the base. Groom Lake. It's all real, Mom. The rules, the monsters, the things they hide in the dirt. They're going to kill me, but you have to tell everyone. Don't let them bury him twice. The man in the suit was screaming now, a high-pitched, panic sound that stripped away his professional veneer. Shut him down. Kill the feed. Kill him. A rifle but slammed into the side of my head, and the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of red and black. I hit the floor, the taste of iron filling my mouth. My vision blurred, the clinical lights of the ceiling stretching into long, glowing fingers that reached down to pull me into the dark. I could hear the phone skittering across the floor, the connection severed, but it didn't matter. The word was out. The silence was broken. They dragged me down the hallway, my boots scraping against the tile. I saw the signs for the lower levels, the places where they kept the unreflective black containers and the sentient fire. I knew where I was going. I was going to become a redacted entry. I was going to be Rule 1, or Rule 2, or maybe something entirely new. But as the elevator doors hissed shut, plunging me into the deepest bowels of the facility, I started to laugh. It wasn't the fake, hollow laugh Rule 5 demanded. It was a jagged, visceral sound that echoed off the cold steel walls. It was the laugh of a man who had finally stopped being a witness and started being a wrecking ball. They think the rules protect the world from the monsters, I thought, as the darkness swallowed me whole. But they forgot the most important thing. When you spend enough time in the dark, watching the things that shouldn't exist, you eventually stop being the prey. You become the thing that the monsters are afraid of. The facility wanted me to be quiet. They wanted me to be a cog in their machine of shadows. But the machine was broken now. I had thrown my brother's memory into the gears, and I would watch it all grind to a halt, even if I had to watch it from the inside of a furnace. I am Trevor Whitmore. I worked at Area 51, and I am done following the rules. The fluorescent lights overhead didn't just flicker, they pulsed with a rhythmic, dying stutter that felt like a migraine taking root in the base of my skull. It was the sound of the system breathing, a wet, mechanical inhalation that tasted of ozone and the copper tang of Johnny's vaporized blood. I sat in the interrogation room, my hands cuffed to a cold steel table that had been scrubbed so hard with bleach it smelled like a hospital morgue. Across from me sat a man whose face was a blank slate of bureaucratic indifference, a suit as sharp as a razor and eyes that held the empty, unreflective vacuum of the containers we hauled through the lower levels. He wanted me to laugh. That was Rule 5. The final rule. Laugh it off. Tell the world it's all a ghost story, a campfire tale for the paranoid and the bored. Deny the green blood. Deny the ship that ate Lewis whole. Deny the screaming fire that fused Miles's skin to the linoleum. But most of all, deny that my brother ever existed. The man leaned forward, the shadows in the room stretching long and jagged against the concrete walls. The sun was setting somewhere far above us, casting a cinematic, high-contrast dusk across the Nevada desert, but down here, there was only the static of the void. He pushed a folder toward me. Inside were photos of a mangled sedan wrapped around a telephone pole on a lonely stretch of Highway 95. He told me that was Johnny. He told me the heat protocol I witnessed, the one that turned my little brother into a charred husk while his blood ran like thick, emerald sludge, was just a glitch in my memory, a stress-induced hallucination. He said that if I didn't start laughing, the system would find a way to make me stop breathing. I looked at the photos. They were perfect. The glass was shattered just right. The blood on the steering wheel was the correct shade of human red. It was a beautiful lie, polished and gleaming like the hull of the Craft in Hangar 3. But I could still feel the heat of the incinerator on my face. I could still hear the sound of Johnny's fist drumming against the reinforced glass of the containment chamber, not pleading for his life, but begging me to look away so I wouldn't have to see what he was becoming. The system didn't just kill him, it tried to erase the very soul of him, replacing his memory with a cheap, plastic imitation of a car wreck. The man in the suit smiled, but his eyes remained dead. "It's funny, isn't it, Trevor?" he whispered. His voice was like sandpaper on dry bone. "All that work, all that secrecy, and your brother dies because he couldn't handle a curve at 60 miles per hour. A tragedy, but a mundane one. You should laugh. It helps the grieving process." I felt something break inside me then. It wasn't a snap, it was a slow, grinding collapse, like a tectonic plate sliding into a lightless trench. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline vengeance that burned brighter than the sentient black liquid that had melted Miles. I realized then that the rules weren't there to protect us. They weren't even there to protect the secrets. They were there to hollow us out, to turn us into unreflective containers just like the ones we moved in the dark. If we didn't have a soul, we couldn't testify. If we didn't have a memory, we couldn't betray. I looked up at the camera in the corner of the room, its red tally light blinking like a predatory eye. I knew they were watching from the observation deck. The generals, the scientists, the men who played God with things that fell from the stars. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the small, jagged shard of unreflective black glass I had palmed from the wreckage of Rule 1. It felt cold, impossibly heavy, a piece of the void itself. I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I leaned in close, until I could smell the peppermint on the interrogator's breath and the stale rot of the secrets he kept. "I'm not going to laugh," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "And I'm not going to forget. Johnny was better than this place. He was better than you. You think you can wipe him out? You think you can just bleach the world until it's as white and empty as this room?" The interrogator's expression didn't change, but I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his pen. "You're making a mistake, Trevor. Rule 5 is for your own protection. If you can't deny it to us, You'll never be able to deny it to them. And they don't like people who remember. I felt a strange sense of peace then, a jagged, visceral clarity. I thought about the ship in Hangar 3, how Lewis had simply walked into the emptiness and become part of the dark. I thought about the green blood, the way it defied the very laws of biology, a signature of something ancient and hungry. The base was a rotting corpse, and we were the maggots crawling through its veins, pretending the stench was perfume. I leaned back, the cuffs rattling against the table. I'm done with the rules, I whispered. I'm done being a cog in a machine that grinds up boys like my brother and spits out paperwork. You want a story? I'll give you one. But it's not going to be the one you wrote. I had spent the last 3 hours of my shift, before the security team grabbed me, rerouting the internal server burst to an external satellite uplink. It was a trick Johnny had taught me when we were kids, messing around with ham radios in our backyard. He was the smart one. He was the one who saw the patterns in the static. I had uploaded everything. The footage of the hatch opening in Hangar 3, the sensor logs of the sentient fire, the high-speed capture of the creature that had scratched Johnny's arm, and most importantly, the audio of the heat protocol activation, the sound of the system deciding that a human life was worth less than a clean floor. The interrogator's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, his brow furrowing as he read the screen. His face went from pale to a sickly, translucent grey. His eyes darted to the camera in the corner, then back to me. "What did you do?" He hissed, his voice cracking. I felt a jagged laugh bubbling up in my chest now, but it wasn't the laughter they wanted. It was a cold, gothic sound, the sound of a man watching his executioner realize the trap has been sprung. I broke Rule 5, I said. I told the truth. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching out like oily fingers. Outside, the Nevada sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving a bruised, purple sky that looked like a hematoma. The high-contrast dusk was fading into a total, suffocating blackness. I knew what was coming. I knew that in a few minutes, the door would burst open and the security team would do to me what they did to Aaron Pike. They would erase me. They would turn me into a ghost, a file deleted from a hard drive, a name scrubbed from a birth certificate. But it wouldn't matter. The signal was already hitting the satellites. It was bouncing off the ionosphere, raining down on every news desk, every conspiracy forum, and every mother's smartphone in the country. My mother would see it. She would see the video of her youngest son being incinerated by the government he had sworn to serve. She would see the green blood and the black liquid and the ships that defied gravity. The secret was out of the container, and there was no way to put it back in. The interrogator stood up, his chair screeching against the floor like a dying animal. "You've killed us all," he whispered. "You don't understand what you've let out. It's not just about the ships, Trevor. It's about the void. We were the only thing keeping it back." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the fear behind the mask. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of the truth. He was afraid of a world where the rules didn't apply. I stood up as well, the cuffs biting into my wrists, the metal cold and biting. "I don't care about the void," I said. "I care about my brother. And you're going to have to explain to the world why you killed him." The door behind him hissed open. 3 men in tactical gear stepped in, their faces hidden behind black visors, their rifles raised. They didn't look like men. They looked like shadows given form, extensions of the facility's will. The interrogator stepped aside, his face a mask of cold, bureaucratic iron once again. I closed my eyes and pictured Johnny. Not the way he looked in the containment chamber, but the way he looked when we were kids, running through the desert at dusk, chasing the long shadows of the Joshua trees. He had always been faster than me. He had always been the one to reach the horizon first. I am Trevor Whitmore. I worked at Area 51. I watched my brother die in a room filled with green blood and white fire. I watched the world's greatest secrets rot behind reinforced steel doors. I broke every rule they gave me, and in doing so, I finally became free. The static in my head reached a deafening roar. The smell of ozone intensified, the air growing thick and heavy like mercury. I felt the first jolt of the tasers, the jagged electricity tearing through my nerves, but I didn't scream. I just stared into the red eye of the camera and waited for the light to go out. The machine was broken. The gears were jammed with the bone and gristle of the people it had consumed. And as the world began to wake up to the nightmare I had unleashed, I realized that Rule 5 was the most important one of all. Not because it kept the secret, but because it was the only thing keeping the men in charge from admitting that they were just as terrified as we were. The desert wind howled outside, a lonely, mournful sound that carried the dust of 1,000 forgotten things. The dusk was over. The night had arrived. And in the heart of the most secret place on earth, a single man refused to laugh. The static took me then, a beautiful, visceral void that tasted of iron and starlight. I felt my existence being pulled apart, the system's digital teeth tearing at my history, my records, my very name. They were erasing me, just as they had erased Aaron and Lewis and Johnny. But they couldn't erase the signal. They couldn't erase the truth. As the darkness closed in, I saw a flicker of blue light in the hallway, the same unearthly glow from Hangar 3. It felt like a beckoning. Or perhaps, it was just the system's way of saying goodbye. I am Trevor Whitmore, and for the first time in my life, I am not following the rules. I am the static in your radio. I am the shadow in your peripheral vision. I am the green blood on the floor of a room that doesn't exist. I'm coming home, Johnny. The light flared, a blinding, white-hot explosion of sound and fury, and then there was nothing. No rules, no base, no secrets, just the cold, infinite silence of the desert night, and the knowledge that somewhere, far away, my mother was picking up the phone to hear the truth. The system was down, and the monsters were finally, mercifully, out.